Sophie and Oliver, a newlywed couple, arrive in Paris full of excitement and anticipation for their honeymoon. They are eager to explore the romantic city, taking in the iconic landmarks, enjoying the quaint cafes, and experiencing the allure of Paris. However, as they begin to settle into the beauty of the city, subtle signs of tension begin to emerge between them. Sophie, while fascinated by the city, senses a distance between herself and Oliver. The joy they had imagined sharing during this special time seems overshadowed by unresolved issues from their past. These growing concerns hint that their perfect honeymoon might not unfold as they had hoped, and the undercurrent of tension suggests that something deeper is at play beneath the surface of their seemingly ideal getaway. While Sophie and Oliver are exploring the streets of Paris, Sophie has a chance encounter with a charming stranger who seems oddly familiar. This man, with an unsettling ease, starts conversing with her and reveals details about her life that she hasn't shared with anyone. His knowledge about her personal life, especially about her marriage to Oliver, catches her off guard. As their conversation deepens, the stranger casually mentions that he once knew Oliver in a very different context, one Sophie wasn't aware of. His cryptic remarks spark a sense of suspicion in Sophie, leading her to question Oliver's past. This encounter sets off a chain of thoughts, causing Sophie to dig deeper into her husband's previous relationships. As she uncovers these unsettling secrets, Sophie begins to wonder if she truly knows her husband as well as she thought, and the foundation of their honeymoon starts to crack. As Sophie continues to dig into Oliver's past, she uncovers a startling and unexpected detail about his previous marriage. She learns that Oliver was once deeply involved in a dangerous and secretive situation, something he had never shared with her. This revelation shakes her to the core, as she realizes that the past he had kept hidden from her was far darker and more complicated than she could have imagined. As Sophie connects the dots, she begins to suspect that their honeymoon was not just a romantic getaway, but rather something far more sinister. Someone from Oliver's past, someone with a personal vendetta, seems to be tracking their every move. Sophie starts to feel increasingly paranoid, as she notices strange occurrences that confirm her worst fears. It becomes clear to her that the danger they are facing is not coincidental. This honeymoon was planned by an enemy, and their lives are now at risk because of something Oliver did long before they ever met. The dream honeymoon has now turned into a terrifying reality, one where Sophie must figure out how to protect herself and her husband from a threat she never saw coming. After spending some time exploring Paris, Sophie returns to their hotel room, expecting a peaceful moment with Oliver. However, when she steps inside, she is confronted with a sight that fills her with dread. Oliver's lifeless body lies motionless on the floor, blood staining the carpet around him. The room is a chaotic mess, a clear sign of a violent struggle. Furniture is overturned, and the sheets are torn, indicating that something horrific had unfolded while she was away. Sophie is paralyzed with fear, her heart racing as the reality of the situation sinks in. In the midst of her panic, she knows she must act quickly. Despite her fear, she forces herself to begin searching the room for any possible clues that might explain what happened. She examines every corner, looking for evidence, trying to piece together how this nightmare could have unfolded. But as she scans the scene, nothing makes sense, and Sophie is left wondering, who could have done this to Oliver, and why? As Sophie frantically tries to contact the authorities, she is hit with another horrifying realization. Oliver is missing. Despite the bloodstains on the floor and the signs of a struggle, there is no trace of where he could have gone. His body has disappeared, and there are no clues as to whether he was taken or fled on his own. The police arrive quickly, but their investigation takes an unexpected turn. Among the disarray in the room, they discover a mysterious, unmarked envelope with a cryptic message written inside. Sophie feels a chill run down her spine as she reads the strange words, which seem to suggest that Oliver's disappearance was not random. Further investigation uncovers a hidden compartment in the room, filled with unsettling items that seem connected to Oliver's past. The evidence points in all directions, and Sophie begins to realize that she is now a person of interest. With no answers, the detectives begin to view her as a possible suspect, raising doubts about her involvement. Sophie, already shaken and terrified, finds herself in a situation where she must prove her innocence, while also trying to uncover the truth about what happened to Oliver. As the investigation progresses, the detectives uncover a startling connection between Oliver's ex-wife and the violent events surrounding his disappearance. The ex-wife, a woman with a troubled and shady history, emerges as a key figure in the case. As the detectives dig deeper into her background, they learn that she had been harboring deep resentment and anger toward Oliver for years. Her obsession with him never faded, and she had been silently plotting her revenge, waiting for the perfect moment to strike. Sophie is horrified to learn that her husband's past marriage was far more complicated and dangerous than she had realized. It turns out that the ex-wife's obsession had grown so intense that she was willing to go to any lengths to punish Oliver. Sophie, unaware of the full extent of the situation, had unknowingly become a target in this twisted game of vengeance. Caught in the crossfire of someone else's unresolved emotions, Sophie finds herself fighting to survive as the true depth of the ex-wife's dangerous intentions comes to light. The honeymoon that was meant to be a new beginning now reveals a terrifying connection to Oliver's past, one that has haunted them both. As Sophie begins to piece together the strange events surrounding Oliver's disappearance, she makes a shocking discovery about the mysterious stranger she had encountered earlier in Paris. He was not just a random individual, but someone from Oliver's past who had been deeply in love with him. This revelation shakes Sophie to her core. The stranger's feelings for Oliver had been intense, obsessive, and unrequited. For years, he had harbored these emotions, secretly hoping for a future with Oliver, despite the fact that Oliver had moved on and married Sophie. However, as Sophie learns, the stranger's unrequited love turned into a dangerous obsession. Unable to accept Oliver's relationship with her, he began targeting Sophie, believing that she was the obstacle standing in the way of his love for Oliver. His delusions twisted the truth, and he saw Sophie as someone who had stolen the man he loved. Driven by jealousy and an overwhelming need for control, the stranger's obsession spirals into violence. Sophie becomes his new target, and she realizes that her life is in grave danger. The love triangle that started with passion and affection has now become a nightmare, where obsession and betrayal collide, leaving Sophie struggling to survive the man who once seemed like nothing more than a fleeting stranger. As the killer's presence becomes more pronounced, Sophie realizes that she is no longer safe, not even in the heart of Paris. With each passing moment, the threat grows more real and terrifying. Forced to flee the hotel, Sophie runs through the narrow, winding streets of Paris, desperately trying to stay one step ahead of the relentless stalker hunting her. The city, once a symbol of romance, now feels like a maze of danger, with no place to hide. Her mind races as she hears footsteps echoing behind her, the sense of being followed growing stronger with each turn. As the chase intensifies, Sophie starts to feel the weight of isolation closing in. She cannot trust anyone around her, not even the authorities. The police, who should have been her allies, seem to be hiding something about Oliver's past, and Sophie begins to wonder if they're involved in something darker. The uncertainty of who to trust eats away at her, and she is forced to rely only on her instincts. Every stranger on the street feels like a potential threat, and every shadow seems to conceal danger. With the killer hot on her trail and no one to turn to, Sophie must summon all her strength and resourcefulness to outsmart her pursuer and escape the clutches of a man who will stop at nothing to capture her. Sophie's search for answers finally leads her to a remote, desolate location outside Paris, a place far from the bustling city, where she had once felt safe. It is here, in the eerie silence of the countryside, that she comes face to face with the killer. The tension is thick, and every step feels like it could be her last. The killer, who has been stalking her for days, is now in front of her, and the confrontation is inevitable. With nowhere to run, Sophie is forced into a life-or-death standoff. She has to summon every ounce of courage and determination to survive. In the final moments, as the killer closes in, Sophie uncovers the chilling truth about Oliver's involvement in the tragedy. The killer, now desperate and broken, reveals that Oliver was more than just a victim in this twisted saga. He was an integral part of the tragic events that unfolded. Sophie learns that Oliver's past, his secrets, and his actions played a pivotal role in provoking the killer's obsession and violence. The killer's motives, once clouded by rage and obsession, are laid bare as Sophie realizes the extent of the manipulation, betrayal, and the dark truths about the man she married. The confrontation not only brings her face to face with the killer, but also forces her to confront the painful reality of her relationship with Oliver, and the devastating role he unknowingly played in the tragedy that nearly cost her life. Sophie's survival comes at a tremendous emotional cost. As she returns to the world she once knew, the weight of the horrors she endured in Paris weighs heavily on her. The images of her traumatic experiences, the moments of terror, and the painful truths about Oliver and the killer constantly replay in her mind. While the killer is apprehended and justice seems to be served, Sophie finds herself facing a much harder battle, learning how to cope with the scars left by her ordeal. As she struggles with her feelings of betrayal and loss, Sophie is torn between returning to the life she once knew or starting anew. The dark secrets of her honeymoon in Paris haunt her, clouding any possibility of finding peace. Despite the passage of time, the trauma lingers, and Sophie finds it impossible to trust anyone again. Every new relationship or gesture of kindness is viewed through the lens of suspicion, as if the world she once thought she knew is now irreparably broken. Ultimately, Sophie makes the painful decision to embrace her independence. She isolates herself from her past, focusing on rebuilding her life without the shadows of betrayal and violence hanging over her. She chooses to prioritize herself above all else, vowing never again to rely on anyone else for her happiness or security. With her heart hardened and her mind clear, Sophie resolves to move forward alone, free from the emotional burden that once defined her. The scars may remain, but they no longer control her. Sophie is determined to reclaim her life, finding strength in her solitude and the promise of a future she will shape on her own terms.